Alright, welcome to the second Heart of Fear, and here we are at the first boss, Windlord Meljarak, I guess is how you pronounce his name. Now, most of the difficulty with this boss fight is actually done at the pole. As you can see, he has a lot of ads. Now, 4 of his ads are able to be CC'd so you don't have to deal with them. The ads you'd want to CC are 2 of the Amber Trappers and 2 of the Battle Menders. Now the reason for this is because the Amber Trappers periodically will CC random people in the raid and will also leave, well, piles of nasty amber stuff on the ground that you don't want to stand in. And the Battle Menders will not only heal, but also will cast a move called Quickening, I believe it's called, which gives a haste buff to all of the ads and the boss. Since it buffs everything all at once, the only way to easily remove all of the buffs is to either have a whole lot of people dispelling almost immediately, which is not going to happen in Raid Finder, or have a priest who's actually paying attention and mass dispelling. Now the best way to do the CC is to use a row of spears that are along the wall opposite to where the boss are standing. These spears give basically any class, even a class that does not have a consistent CC, the ability to CC a mob, and it can help you from accidentally CCing an extra mob. As if you CC 5 mobs, then the boss will immediately break all crowd control effects on all the targets, and then you will be dealing with all the mobs at once. This is very likely going to lead to the main tank getting squashed, who's tanking all of the ads. Now, one of the easiest ways to do this fight is simply have one tank pick up the boss and the other tank pick up the ads that are active. If you have successfully CC'd 4 of the ads, the damage should not be too incredibly hard, but it is possible, if you're worried, to have the other tank take a couple of the Blade Masters, as their technical name is. An interesting thing to note is that each group of ads, the 3 Amber Trappers, the 3 Blade Masters, and the 3 Battle Menders, all share health pool. Damage is shared in between them. This means that even though you have 4 of the ads CC'd, if you kill the 1 Battle Mender, for example, the other 2 Battle Menders that you previously had CC'd will die as well. This means that you never actually have to un-CC these ads to kill them. Keep them CC'd the whole fight, and the fight will go pretty smoothly and pretty easily. As the groups of ads die, the boss will gain a buff on himself that increases his damage and attack speed, which basically simply makes him hit the current tank who's tanking him harder. He will chuck his weapon in a certain direction called the Whirling Blade that inflicts damage. It is dodgeable. If you're DPS or healers, try not to stand in it just to make things easier. And he will periodically do several AoEs, Rain of Blades, and drop wind bombs around. Wind bombs will explode when people come near them, and it being Raid Finder, you can simply assume that these are going to explode pretty quickly after they're placed out. Once all of his ads go down, the fight is pretty straightforward. The boss will be hitting harder, but not really hitting harder that it's not easily handleable, and you simply finish him off, netting a fairly easy kill. Almost the entire difficulty in this fight is getting his ads down and properly handling the CC. If you handle the CC correctly, the fight is pretty simple. The Amber Shaper Unsock is another boss that isn't particularly difficult to get down. In fact, he's only got a couple of abilities that really bear watching at all. He will channel a beam at a random player who simply has to preferably not run it right through the middle of the entire raid, and periodically he will empower random players, transforming them into amber monstrosities. Now, while someone is an amber monstrosity, all their abilities are removed and replaced with 4 other random abilities. In Raid Finder, the only 2 of these abilities that are extremely important are the Amber Strike is your number 1 ability while transformed, and you should simply be spamming this on the boss to DPS, even if you are a healer, as if you are transformed later on in the fight, you obviously can't heal, so simply be spamming this ability to add some damage onto the boss. Even more importantly than the damage this does is a stacking debuff on the boss to increase the damage he takes. This is very important to making this fight go quickly and easily. The other important ability, and this is important to not give your healers heart attacks, is to use your number 2 ability periodically. Now, the time when you would like to use your number 2 ability is to interrupt the Amber Explosion, which is a cast bar that you see on your character. The way this works is it's almost as though you are casting the spell and you're using your number 2 to interrupt yourself. If you do not interrupt it, it will pulse out a massive AoE, dealing a fair amount of damage to everyone in the entire raid. Near the end of the fight, when you will have multiple people transformed, this can very quickly kill everyone in the raid if people are not interrupting it. Just to mention the other abilities, your number 3 ability, Consume Amber, will consume the yellow puddles left on the floor by one of the mobs that will be present during this fight. And your number 4 ability is the ability you use to break free, in other words, to remove this empowered shape to return back to your regular form. In Raid Finder, it's not incredibly difficult. While you are transformed, you have a bar called Willpower. If this reaches 0, you will die, and you will essentially become an ad that then must be tanked and, of course, killed. When you drop below 10% HP, you will automatically be freed, though you can use your number 4 button to free yourself as long as you're under 20%. A small bit of the way through the fight, the Amber Shaper will summon up a giant amber monstrosity. This must be picked up and tanked, and it has a few abilities. Nothing incredibly devastating, however. He will periodically pick up the main tank that's tanking him and chuck them away. This will also cause a threat wipe, and you cannot actually damage the boss, so all damage should be on the Amber Monstrosity. Now, because of the periodic threat wipe, one of the tanks who will be tanking Amber Shaper Unsock will periodically gain threat and begin tanking both of them. When the other tank comes back, simply taunt back off and continue tanking the Amber Monstrosity. In other words, one tank will be tanking the Amber Shaper Unsock, the other tank will be tanking the Monstrosity. However, the tank on the Amber Shaper will periodically also have the Monstrosity whenever the threat is temporarily wiped due to the toss. Once the giant Amber Monstrosity goes down, the boss will run to the center of the room and begin channeling a massive pulsing AoE. He will also hit much harder during this time. Also during this time, in Raid Finder at least, he will begin transforming more and more players, meaning you will have more and more players turning into the ads. While this means, of course, that you'll run the risk of some of these players dying, and of course spawning the ad when they die, as well as it being Raid Finder, many players not interrupting their Amber Explosion and causing lots of raid damage. In effect, this fight can be summed up: interrupt the Amber Explosion if you're transformed, spam number 1 if you're on the boss. As a tank, either be tanking the Amber Shaper or the Monstrosity, depending on your job. Simply make sure they're not on any of the DPS. And when he runs to the center of the room, simply tank him as normal and burn him down. Do this correctly, and it's a fairly easy fight. The final boss of the Heart of Fear is, ironically, a fairly simple fight. Now, this doesn't mean there's nothing to pay attention to, it's just fairly straightforward, especially for the tanks. As the tanks will run in and pick up the boss, the only thing you really have to watch out for is a stacking debuff that the boss periodically puts on the main tank. Now, this debuff doesn't really do anything nasty to you per se, but if it reaches 5, the main tank will gain a massive increase to damage and health and be mind controlled, in which case you'll then begin to rampage around and slaughter the raid. To avoid this, simply taunt off before the stacks reach 5. My own personal preference is to taunt off at 4. Some tanks like to taunt off at 3, but it's up to personal preference. After you've fought the boss for a while, the boss will retreat, basically removing itself from the entire field of battle, and summon up a group of ads. These ads will be identical to a couple of the groups that were of ads before you fought, that you had to kill before you fought the boss, and you simply round them up and AoE them down. As with the ads before the boss, the only real thing to pay attention to is to interrupt the dispatch that comes from, I believe, the Wind Blades. This is a rather nasty AoE and can cause your healers quite a bit of a headache. The boss will then pop back out, and you will simply fight it as normal again. After a little while, the boss will retreat again, and will summon up another group of ads, which you must deal with in the exact same way. One interesting thing to note, though, is if your DPS is high enough, you can push her into Phase 3 without her ever actually doing another retreat, but your DPS has to be high enough for this to happen. The final phase that she has is essentially, for the most part, as from the tank's perspective, exactly the same as the previous stages. One of the main differences is that you'll periodically face in the direction of random direction of a random player and start channeling a massive cone attack. This attack deals a fair amount of damage, but more importantly, applies a very large, long-lasting fear on the target. If this is not dispelled, the target will be running around for well over 20 seconds. If someone is afflicted by this fear, as of course being Raid Finder, many DPS may not even bother to run out of it, dispel them as quickly as possible. Tanks shouldn't have to worry about this too much, but still, just make sure you're not standing in a massive purple cone. The only other thing to note about this boss is that she does hit rather hard. So especially on the tank swaps, if you're the new tank coming in, make sure you've got some defensive cooldowns ready to go, because the healers might be, especially in Raid Finder, a little bit slow on picking up the fact that the tanks have swapped and you might not be getting heals. Aside from that, it's a pretty straightforward and easy fight. And that has been a tanking guide for the Raid Finder, the second part of Heart of Fear. Thanks for watching, and good luck.